Good evening, Provost. Hi. I am Jackie. Some of you guys might know me from our practice locally, and thank you for tuning into this video. So, the reason why I want to make this video is because over the last couple of weeks, especially the last 3 weeks, I've been getting a lot of people basically asking me questions with regards to COVID vaccination and related information. And I do feel that there is a problem with people getting answers, and that is affecting, people's that is affecting people's ability to make informed decision, I find. And I've been saying the same thing over and over again to my patients. So for that reason, I thought I'll just make a clip video where I can answer some of the more common questions. I'm a nerd. I love math, and I think it's easier to demonstrate situations with math and numbers more than anything else. So I'm gonna try to stick to that throughout this video, and just with my experience, just on my opinion on a few of these questions, and hopefully this will help you make some more informed decision when it comes to whether it's the vaccination or just decision about this whole COVID situation. So yeah, hope you'll find this helpful and potentially also be entertained. I know math can be boring. I'll try to do my best to see what I can do. So one of the biggest and most common question I get asked is, why is the fourth wave so much worse even though we have vaccination now? And a lot of people are just kind of dissatisfied on, people, when they ask people about that, people just, I do think there is actually a good explanation for that. So for that, I just want to show you guys, based on the data from Alberta's government's website with regards to vaccination. So in Alberta, we have a total population of about 4.4 million, give or take. And as of the 5th of October, when I put the stats, around about 2.8 million people has been fully vaccinated, i.e. had 2 doses already. And there's about 150 to 200,000 that is with first dose, which leaves the unvaxxed population at around 1.2 million. Out of the 1.2 million, about 660,000 people are essentially under 12 years old. So that leaves some eligible adults within Alberta, about 583,000 Albertans who's eligible for vaccination but unvaxxed. So that's right, majority of Alberta has been vaccinated. However, the unvaccinated such people still accounts for about 580,000. So I would like to think of this more like in terms of forest and wildfire. So last year, when this thing all started, public health was very quick in terms of putting in a lot of restrictions to try and separate each individual as much as possible. And the purpose of that is to prevent person-to-person communication of the disease. To be honest, at that time, first wave, we hardly had any cases. I know in my local area, we had 0 cases of COVID up until August. So at that time, a lot of people may start questioning, was the measure really necessary? You were telling us the sky is falling, things are going to be haywire, and we canceled everything, yet nothing happened. On retrospect, what happened today is that despite only about 580,000 people being more at risk in this province, or 1.2 million if you count all the children, that is enough tinder to actually allow the virus to spread and cause quite a lot of infections. So the reason why we still have it bad now is because we no longer have any of the restrictions, at least for most of summer, to prevent in-person-to-person transmission. Our leadership was pretty keen on getting over and overdone with, and we were like, oh, woohoo, best summer forever! And everybody can just interact and mingle, which on a social perspective, it's not a very bad thing, but that also facilitates viral transmission. And if you think of this in the analogy of trees with wildfire, last year what happens is we have 4 and 4. If you can imagine individuals as trees in a forest, last year we had a lot of measures in place to sort of separate different trees so that if any tree specifically catches fire, then there are measures in place so the fire don't spread too far. And if you think of vaccination as like fire retardant that you can apply to trees, then essentially we still have probably about 1.2 million trees which are not have no protection against it. But once you take any other external measures to prevent the fire thing, 1.2 million trees can still start a really big bonfire once it catches on. So that is the reason why we're still having it bad, even though majority of Albertans has been vaccinated. It's just that the number of people who's unvaccinated is still large enough to drive the infection. Now, to be fair, yes, with Delta variant, we are seeing more breakthrough infections even amongst vaccinated people. So it is a fair question somebody then asked, okay, so how can you say that the unvaccinated people are the ones who drive in the infection? And other question also very common second question is, then why bother vaccinating if you can still get COVID anywhere? So, with regards to that, I put that question and this question together because I think the answer to it is exactly the same. At the end of the day, it comes down to risks. In life and in medicine, nothing ever works 100%. Nothing is ever risk-free. And I must say, in my experience, up until the Delta variant, I did not see a single COVID case in vaccinated individuals. The first vaccinated case, fully vaccinated individual who got COVID was a Delta case, and we only started seeing it really around mid-August or so. So, to put into context, I took down the statistics of the more importantly would be the past 120 days data from the Alberta website with regards to ICU admission and with regards to hospital admission or so. So, in the last 120 days, which is about the last 4 months, we've had 936 total ICU admission, out of which 70 of them is fully vaccinated individual, and the rest of them are either one shot or unvaccinated. And I believe the one shot population also accounts for a single-digit percentage. So about 7.4% of people in ICU are actually vaccinated, and 92.6% of people are either one shot or non-vaccinated. In terms of general hospitalization, about 4,287 individuals at the time when I put the stats has been admitted in hospital in the past 122 days. Fully vaccinated accounts for about 727, which is about 17%. And the unvaxxed, and I believe this number does not include one-shot population, is about 77.2%. So, back to the original population thing. Now remember, totally vaccinated individual accounts for 63.7% of the population, which is the majority. But in terms of the number of them in the hospital group and in ICU group, there's significantly less vaccinated individual representing. So this is how we know that the vaccination reduces the risk of infection. Think of it this way. At this point in time in history, in Alberta, the question of whether you will come into contact with COVID or not is a question of when, not if. It's everywhere. So no way you can avoid it at this point in time. I can guarantee every single one of us, even if you don't work in healthcare, somewhere since August until December, you are going to come into contact with COVID at some point in time. So if the risk of exposure is the same, and argument's sake, let's say if the vaccine does not work, what you should see is that the proportion of vaccinated individual in hospitals and the proportion of the vaccinated individual in ICU should reflect the proportion of vaccinated individual in general public. And in fact, it should even be more skewed, because if you think about it, majority of the population group with least vaccination is usually your younger generation from about 12 years old all the way to about 30 to 40-year-old, and usually the 70 and 80-year-olds who were the most vulnerable group to succumb to COVID have like much higher vaccination rates of like because I'm sure it could be up to about 90%. I'm speaking under correction, but you can check that. So the mere fact that in reality we are seeing that majority of the admitted individuals are unvaccinated, and vast majority of people who needing ICU support are unvaccinated, demonstrates that majority of the vaccinated individual, even though they had come into contact with COVID, they've either A, never really contracted COVID, or B, even if they had COVID, they had really mild symptoms. And if you take the unvaccinated population away, then the numbers of hospitalization and ICU population, it becomes very manageable for our system. So yes, it's so the biggest. So even though that vaccine doesn't give 100% protection, in vast majority of cases, it does prevent people from getting infected, and if they get infected, they will have mild symptoms. In my practicing experiences in this wave, we've had quite a significant amount of COVID admissions through our facility, and we have sent people away to ICU, and I have seen people who even have post-COVID symptoms, getting blood clot after COVID that threatens their limbs, or in pediatric cases, post-COVID inflammation syndrome, which is much more horrible than COVID itself for a lot of children. Yet all these individuals who are unvaccinated, and in the few individuals who I know who were fully vaccinated and still got COVID, majority of them had cold and flu-like symptoms, probably a bit of a headache and stuff, and then they're done. That's it. So it does help with both mild diseases and with preventing of hospitalization in my clinical experience, which is in keep with the data that the province has collected. Now, if you want to look at specific risk and stuff, so I also did the math to look at both the risk of ICU admission and death rates. So if you look at the risk of ICU admissions, if you look at the vaxxed individual, now assuming that everybody has the equal risk of exposure to COVID, which at this stage in our province, I think it's fair to say that is definitely the case. The amount of vaccinated individual in our ICU is only 70, and the amount of vaccinated individual population within our province is about 2.8 million. So that makes your probability, based on the current data in the last 120 days, if you get exposed to COVID, the risk of you then catch COVID, get sick, and sick enough to go into ICU for fully vaccinated individual is 0.002%. Now, if you are unvaccinated, including the pediatrics population, about 866 individuals falls into that category, and the unvaccinated population at the time of the video was about 1.2 million. That risk is 0.069%, which is about 60 times, quite a bit higher than about 30 times higher than what unvaccinated. But wait. So children in general, which is the only saving grace for this pandemic, in general, they have they do generally very well with COVID in general. So if you take any under 12 away from ICU and away from population, so you purely look at the risk of being unvaccinated and going to ICU as somebody who's above 12 years old eligible for vaccine, you get a number of 852. There were at the time of doing about 14 children were in ICU population, and the unvaccinated pool dropped down to about 580,000. And so the risk of you getting COVID, then get sick enough to need ICU as an individual, as an unvaccinated individual at this time is 0.146%. Put it into perspective, that means 1,000 unvaccinated individual catches COVID, at least one will need ICU. If you compare the rate of percentage of unvaxxed above 12-year-old versus just fully vaccinated individuals, you have a 70 times higher risk of needing ICU support if you are unvaccinated when exposed to COVID versus a vaccinated individual. So that is that. And if you look at the death rate in the last 120 days, so once again, putting the stats from the Alberta Health website, we had about 525 deaths happened over the last 122 days. I count them, they actually broke it down easily to, pre-existing condition and vaccination status. So the amount of, out of these individuals, the ones who were really unlucky, who were healthy and fully vaccinated, there were 4 individuals, account for 0.8%. If you were healthy but unvaccinated, the amount of people who died in the last 122 days was 57%, which is 10.9% of all that numbers. And so you can see that the risk of dying if you are healthy and vaxxed versus unhealthy and unvaxxed is about 10 times higher. And if you look at the actual risk of dying from COVID, if you're vaccinated, but if you have to look at the condition as well. So if you have pre-existing condition and vaccinated, about 151 individual falls into that category. But in terms of people with pre-existing condition and unvaxxed, it's 291. So if you have pre-existing conditions, then the risk of dying if you're unvaccinated is still twice compared to if you were vaccinated. So one interesting thing I want to point out with regards to the statistics is that then if you look at the risk of dying if you are vaccinated, then you will see the risk is 0.005%. Although unvaxxed is 0.06%, which is still 10 times higher. But you will notice that number is actually higher than the previous number I showed you for ICU admission, which was only 0.002%. The caveat of the stat, which I think is very important, is that majority of the previous condition and vaccinated individuals generally have very poor health to start off with, and they are at the higher age group. So a lot of them would have done a lot worse even if they were unvaccinated. And secondly, a lot of them probably did not decide not to go into ICU care because of either their wishes or just the severity of their conditions. So that I feel gives even more incentive for if you have relatively healthy to get vaccinated, because a lot of the number are skewed because simply because the pre-existing condition vaccinated people are the ones who are, they have much higher risk to die of COVID in the first place. If you go onto the alberta.ca website and go into vaccination outcome statistics, they actually do have a quick lowdown on how many vaccinated individuals broken down into their population group. And you will see that especially in the anti-40-year-old group, you hardly get any admission into ICU if you're vaccinated, but you still get significant admission if you're unvaccinated. So now, I've talked about the risk of vaccination and why I think it worked. I just want to use an analogy to put it that way to drive things home, right? So think of seatbelts. Seatbelt doesn't work 100% either. If you are on a snow road and you slipped off and run into a ditch and you're wearing a seatbelt, your car turned over, in those kinds of situations, the seatbelt will definitely prevent severe injury or death by keeping you in the seat without throwing you out. However, if you're going to drive at 120 km per hour straight into a semi, no amount of seatbelt is going to prevent the outcome of possible death. And can seatbelt be dangerous? Does it have a risk for it? I suppose yes. If you drive into a lake and you are unable to get rid of your seatbelt to swim out of your car, you could drown. So a seatbelt could even harm you in that kind of accidental situation. Having said that, we don't go out there and say, oh, seatbelt is useless, we should not make seatbelt, because if you run into a semi, a seatbelt ain't going to save you. Or you don't hardly say, well, I'm not going to wear seatbelt because the risk of dying with a seatbelt, if I drive into a lake and I can drown, if I can't get rid of my seatbelt, is there. No, we don't, because majority of the time, majority of the accident happens with our single vehicle, swerving off the road, and that's why seatbelt work. So when you analyze the risk and benefit, the benefits of wearing a seatbelt outweighs the risk. Same with COVID, which leads me to the next question, which we get asked a lot, which is with all these bad things reports on Facebook about side effects of COVID and all that, how do I know that vaccine is safe, right? A very fair question, I think, because at the end of the day, everybody knows, any kind of medical intervention will carry a certain amount of risk. So now once again on the government on the alberta.ca website, they did compile statistics on the number of doses of vaccination given, and so far we have already given about 6.6 million doses. So that's including most of people who already got 2 doses plus some who get 1 dose. And there's a fair amount of people who got a 3rd dose if they had AstraZeneca or they meet the criteria. So that's the amount of doses we have. The total reported adverse events following immunization specific to COVID is about 1,679. So the risk of that is 0.027%. One thing to note, though, is that encompasses any kind of significant adverse reaction that actually gets reported. I personally have reported about 5 of these events, so I contribute to that number as well. So the most important one that I've reported out of 5 of them, there was there's individuals with rashes, individual with some allergic reaction. There was some individual with prolonged heart palpitation kind of situation. However, just to put in perspective, I have not personally seen, and nor has my colleague, as far as I am aware, seen a blood clot related to vaccination, and none of us have seen cardiomyelitis, which is the heart inflammation condition related to vaccination. None of us have seen that either. So from our observation, we have seen systemic inflammation problems secondary to COVID. We have seen blood clot complications because of COVID. And if you consider Provost, we have only about 200 confirmed cases, but we've already seen significant complications and problems from those cases versus thousands of vaccination, and we've hardly seen any kind of complications from vaccination. So that's how we know, in terms of, from as far as we can observe, vaccine risk is quite minimal. Personally, I'm vaccinated, my wife's vaccinated, my entire family is vaccinated, so is my wife's family. None of us had any significant side effects that was worth reporting. So from a statistical perspective, once again, if you eat a steak, there's a risk of choking. If you go swimming in the lake, there's a risk of drowning. Any activity you do, they will carry some risk. And unfortunately with Facebook, any adverse reaction will get amplified because that is things. So if there's 10,000 people who got vaccination and nothing happened, that's boring news. Nobody's going to read that. But if one person got vaccinated and got some weird adverse reaction, it'll be all over Facebook because that is interesting news. So when you look at the number and statistically speaking, vaccination is so much safer than getting COVID. And fair point. So next question, why should I take risk with vaccine or rather risk with COVID? Well, fair point. It depends on how, once again, risk and benefit ratio, right? And yes, vaccination does has its own risk, even though very small. Why take that small risk if you think it's not going to affect you? Example I can give is, for example, Ebola is a disease that carries a 50% mortality rate. So one risk is Ebola, which carries about a 50% mortality rate. I will not recommend you get vaccinated against Ebola at this point in time in Alberta, because if you're going to stay in this part of the world, the chances of you coming into contact with Ebola and needing protection against Ebola is practically zero. So why take the risk of taking Ebola vaccine if you're not going to come into contact with Ebola? Same thing with, parachuting. If you're never going to jump out of a plane, you don't need to wear a parachute. If you're never going to drive in a car, you don't need to wear a seatbelt. So it is relative. The problem, though, once again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, is that at this point in time, coming into contact with COVID in Alberta, essentially, I feel is inevitable. It is a question of when, not if. So the problem is, either you will need to be vaccinated and then come into contact with that, or you will come into contact with COVID naturally. And in the first part of the video, I sort of already explained why risk of hospitalization or ICU stay is so much higher with unvaccinated individual compared to vaccinated individual. That's why I do feel, in terms of risk-benefit ratio, especially if you are going to come into contact with COVID anyway, it probably is wise to maybe choose one where you will minimize your risk of complication. And for me, that is why I feel that it's recommended that you should not take your chance with COVID when vaccination option is available. So the second law, that lead into one of the biggest thing I've seen in my practice, why people actually are quite ticked off about the whole vaccination situation, which is, why is the evil government wanting me to get vaccinated? If there are any government individual watching this thing, I apologize. I don't think you guys are evil. However, there's some perceptions out there because of certain policies that's been pushed over the last, couple of months. First, we have no COVID, woo-hoo! And all of a sudden, COVID is killing us all. Yeah, so people do have questions about that. Well, I feel like, with the risks thing I've already talked about, there is a good reason why government wants to, get you vaccinated, even if they don't have the people's interest in heart. And I'm actually going to do math on this one as well, and I'm going to look at the finances of things for the government. So just think of it this way: put yourself in the shoe of Alberta government, and just look at the finances of our government. The whole of last year, we had a lot of shutdown. A lot of people lose their job, so we lost. So EI has to do a lot of payout, and there's a lot of people who don't pay nearly as much income taxes because they don't have income, and there are many businesses who don't pay as much taxes because all the businesses are shut down. So on the revenue side, you already have a lot of revenue decrease thanks to the COVID shutdown. As a government, that is bad. Whether you like your people or not, this is hitting your pockets. So for that reason, it is in government's best interest to have this over and done with and get businesses back in, get individuals back to work as soon as possible so they can still keep getting taxation income. Now, in terms of healthcare expenditure, so according to the Canadian Institute for Health Info, and you can actually find there, they actually worked out the cost of average COVID stay in hospital. An average ICU cost is about $50,000. Non-ICU stay is about $15,000. So if you average that, an average hospital stay for a COVID patient is about $23,000. These are significantly higher than majority of acute conditions we deal with. And one of the main reasons is because a COVID person doesn't go into ICU for 3 days and then come out. Most COVID patients goes into ICU and stay there for 2 to 3 weeks. The average length of stay of COVID patients in our hospital is anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks. So it is the length of stay and the amount of drugs we need to use, especially in ICU, to help with lung ventilation, to help with sedation, that is driving up this kind of cost. So let's look at this cost and see, let's take just the spot statistics of our COVID cases, hospitalization cases on the 5th of October. So on that day itself, we had about 252 ICU patients running at about 50 cases per patient. The government is already spending $12.6 million just to keep these people alive in hospital. And in terms of non-ICU cases, we take out the total hospital minus that amount, and you multiply that 15K, that's another about 12.6. So just from the stats we have on the 5th of October, Alberta government is spending $25.2 million just to keep these people alive and to keep them healthy. This is a healthcare cost that did not need to be spent if we had no COVID. So this is over and above our average costs of healthcare. Now, if we look at the cost of stay in the last 122 days, which I did pull out as well, and this one is even better because from this data, I can look at the people who were vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So we've already had 936 hospital ICU stays in the last 120 days. At 50 cases per pop, that is $46.8 million. So in the last 4 months, to keep people alive in ICU, the government of Alberta has spent already about $50 million on that. Out of which, vaccinated individual accounts of 70 of them, which cost us $3.5 million. The rest of them cost the rest of the amount, which is about $43 million. If you look at the total hospital stay, about 4,287. Long story short, we spent almost $100 million on healthcare just in the last 4 months alone to keep people and help people with COVID. Once again, vaccinated individual accounts for about 16 million of it, and unvaccinated individual accounts for 76 million of it. So let's for a moment assume that the government doesn't have the people's best interest at heart, and the government just wants to get as much money as they can from the public. So even under that premise, COVID is costing them a lot, especially the unvaccinated portion of the costs. So that, I feel, is why the government decided a lottery to try and get people vaccinated is a good idea. Because it literally is cheaper to pay everybody $100 to get vaccinated. You can literally pay, for $76 million, you can pay 760,000 people $100 each to get vaccinated and not to have this kind of ICU number. So, to me, I do feel, if you want to say, is there a political agenda behind pushing for vaccination? Of course there is. The government, the COVID is killing the government. It is. It's making them spending crap loads of money to try to keep people alive in the healthcare system, money that under normal circumstances does not need to be spent on healthcare. Can you think it's a good idea to cut nursing wages in the middle of a pandemic? And prior to pandemic, he thinks it's a great idea to cut pays to the family doctors in rural Alberta. I do not think their best way of spending money is, let's spend more on healthcare. I really don't think they like that. But they have to. And that, I'm pretty sure, pisses them off. And that's why they want people to get vaccinated so that they don't have to spend all these healthcare costs taking care of the citizens. If you believe that government really don't care the people. Once again, if any government official is watching this video, I apologize. I'm just trying to push, let people look at it from a different perspective. And I think you care about the people. I think you do. So please don't send CRA or some random crap after me, please. Okay. So, look into that. That's why I just want to hope I can answer some of the questions to some people with, and those are the most common ones I've been getting. Another one which my colleague wants me to really talk about is vaccine safety in terms of children, in terms of pregnant lady. So for this one, I apologize. I do not have good numbers I can show like I did with the rest of the cases. However, just talking from experience, speaking with my colleague and experiences and stuff like that, the problem with the Delta variant is we are seeing a lot more adverse reaction and adverse problems with pregnant ladies getting COVID. And some studies have shown that, if you are vaccinated, you actually do confer the antibody, and if you're breastfeeding, your baby will get protection from it as well. And in terms of long-term study, it is true. Right in the beginning, January, when we first rolled this out, at that time, we don't have enough data to actually say, is that safe for pregnancy? We're not sure at that time. However, 2.3 billion doses of various vaccination globally later, and with our gynae colleagues observing the situation and stuff, we are fairly confident to say that it is very safe for pregnant individual to actually get the COVID vaccination. Once again, pros and cons. Would you want to do this COVID vaccine? If you're not going to contact COVID, why risk having a vaccination when you're vaccination? Fair point. Problem once again, right now in this time in history, in Alberta, you probably will come into contact with COVID, whether you like it or not. And because of that, and the adverse problems that you get once you get COVID while you're pregnant is pretty severe. For that reason, I do think risk-benefit ratio, again, it is much more beneficial to get vaccinated rather than take your chance with COVID if you're pregnant. Same thing with children above age 12. Once again, just to iterate, I have not seen any child with myocarditis after vaccination, but we have seen children who has multiple systemic inflammatory syndrome post-COVID in our small town. So once again, just to reiterate, risk-benefit, the way we see it, the risk of COVID for children is still much higher than the risk of vaccination for children. And for that reason, for protection at this point in time in history, I do think it is worthwhile. So, these are the most common questions that I get asked. It's a long video, and I know I ranted a little bit. I'm sorry, but I hope this will be helpful in helping some of you guys to make a bit more informed decision when it comes to whether decision to vaccination or decision to stay safe. We know that Thanksgiving is coming up, and I hate to be a party pooper, but last year this was the time where our second wave gets kick-started. I am hopeful that with fair amount of vaccination, and that people are taking vaccination more seriously now, that we will not have as much of an uptick as we would see last year. However, I do still think precaution is good, because at this moment in time, our system is already filled to the brim, and I really do not think we have any more capacity to take on any more surges should that occur in the next month or two. And finally, a shout out to all my colleagues and friends, whoever you are working in the rest of the province and everything. I thank you for everything you do, especially all the ICU physicians, internal docs, everyone I've spoken with. If you guys have still now, if you guys have happened to come across this video, I even in my small town over here, I'm exhausted. I've been so worn out by this whole crap. I cannot imagine what you guys are going through. I thank you for everything you do for us and for everyone else. And lastly, just to everyone, I am trying to make a case that from a statistical perspective, it is safe and it is beneficial to get vaccinated. The ultimate decision still rests on you, and I do respect this as an individual choice. Having said that, I just want people, I'm just really concerned that people have been making uninformed decisions, and I hope this at least help make some difference in terms of that. So thank you for your attention. If you watched the whole thing, if you survived watching the whole video, woohoo! Yeah, if I start to get any more other questions that I feel there's enough people who are wondering about, I might make another video like this just to give a bit of an answer. And otherwise, thank you all. God bless and happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time.